I believe that we need to look at this from the macro perspective, okay? So, you are a Russian soldier, circa February 24th, 2022. You have just been given orders to march past the Ukrainian border. At first, you don't even know you did that. You don't even know that was what you were ordered to do. You just kind of do it, and you fill in the blanks later and are told the situation of what you originally thought was a training operation. But here you are now, one of Russia's favorite sons, one of Russia's best sons, marching into Ukraine. But then before you know it, boom, you're out. What exactly got you? You don't know. Maybe it was a Bayraktar. Maybe it was a, you just tripped and you hit your face. It could be any number of things. But you then are in a coma for 2.5 years, and you wake up and, oh my goodness, you're in bed, you're looking around, a nurse comes in, you say, oh my gosh, how long has it been? Oh, it's been like 2.5 years. It's August 2024. Oh my goodness, wow. Oof. So how did the war end? Did we take Kiev quickly? Well, not exactly. Oh, well, what? How is it going? And she turns the TV screen, and the Ukrainian special operation to demilitarize Kursk Oblast has begun. If you look at it from that perspective, right? No matter how this operation goes, no matter where this goes from here, this is surreal to observe. At the start of this war, people were talking about this war lasting about a week. At the start of this war, people talked about this war maybe lasting about a month. And now we have it not only lasting way past that, but the Russians not achieving a ton of their objectives. They still haven't captured the rest of the Donbass. And now offensives into Kursk, just as the Russians were starting to gain momentum towards Toretsk, towards Pokrovsk, towards these locations that they're trying to capture, that they're still making progress towards. And we're going to talk about how that progress could be hindered by these operations in Kursk, and how the Russians could still decide to keep the pressure on top of these locations, but how that could cost them in Kursk and the dilemma that they face. But this is surreal. This is surreal. So now that we've started at that untraditional place, let me read you this statement from Russian state media to give you an idea of the adjustment we're going to have to make mentally from Russian invasion of Ukraine to now Ukrainian invasion of Russia. Because there is a real possibility, while not concrete, while not for certain, that the Ukrainians are going to decide to stay in this territory that they are now currently moving into in order to try to hold this later for negotiations. And so whereas the previous crossings into Belgorod were nothing more than maybe PR opportunities, just a good way to burn equipment and use the Russian far-right forces that you've got, making a mess of themselves and embarrassing the Ukrainian media corps anytime they open their mouths, is a good way to use them. This is a real breakthrough, and we need to talk about this accordingly. Okay. Maria Zarkova claimed this morning the attack by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region is another terrorist attack against civilians. In this case, Russia has long and greatly surpassed Ukraine in a number of this is just Dmitri's yada 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 about it. Okay. But this right here just shows you how much the war has shifted. The war is no longer just isolated to Ukraine. I remember at the start of this war, again, it was just questions of how long Ukraine could last. And then 2 years in this war, it's like, wow, the Ukrainians are launching drones back. They're hitting oil refineries. And now the war cannot be contained whatsoever to Ukraine. The war is spilling over in all sorts of ways. The Ukrainians just last month launched more drone attacks into Russia than Russia launched into Ukraine. The Ukrainians have hit oil refineries. The Ukrainians have hit ammo reserves. The Ukrainians have hit training facilities. The Ukrainians have hit all sorts of infrastructure that supports the war, and they've done it in multiple oblasts, both using Western equipment if it's around, for example, the Belgorod offensive, and using their own jerry-rigged equipment that they've made and developed over the last few years, going from being able to strike a target 250 kilometers away to being able to strike targets 1,400 kilometers away. This is just to show you like the leaps and bounds that they've advanced forward. So let's talk about the breakthrough itself. Let's talk about how this happened. So I don't know where to exactly start, so we're just going to start on the day of, and I'm going to show some pictures, I'm going to show some sources, but there's just so much that has happened that I cannot cite and talk about everything. So on before August 5th and before August 6th, when the operation really began, there was Ukrainian buildup in the area, but the problem was that the Russians had done an offensive into the Kharkiv region, and there had been some signaling that they might be at least attempting something in the Sumy region, even though they had none of the resources in the region to do it. There were some crossings with soldiers and some PR moves, and some signaling from the Ukrainians that was able to paint the buildup of Ukrainian troops in this area not as offensive, but as defensive. That the Ukrainians are building up troops here because they don't want to be caught off guard if the Russians were to, say, launch another offensive into Sumy Oblast the way that they did into the Kharkiv Oblast on Lipsy and Volchansk. And so that these buildup of troops are not to attack Russia. No, don't even think about it. These troops were being built up to defend Ukraine. And this justification, we don't know exactly how the Russians processed it, but considering how little troops the Russians have to respond to the attack that has just been unleashed upon them in Kursk, you can probably imagine that it was something close to this, that they thought it was defensive, but it wasn't. And the Ukrainians, before the attack commenced, attacked a bunch of substations, attacked a bunch of communication software, and dropped jamming equipment all along the area. So that the Russians, when they tried to communicate with each other, when the attack actually came out and they started to panic, they were having problems and are still having problems right now trying to communicate with each other. And then the artillery came in, then the FPV drones came in, and the offensive started. Originally, the estimates were, when they finally did kind of like unblur, because the Ukrainian side, and this is true for most of the reports we're going to be talking about until very recently, most of the reports have come from the Russian side, because the Ukrainian side have been basically radio silent, despite a few like social media mishaps recently in the last 24 hours. Now that the operation has been going along for a few days, the Ukrainians have been largely silent. So most of the information we have about these, like the early offensive work, is from the Russian side. So originally the reports was about 1,000 troops. Now I'm hearing maybe it's about 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers, but a sizable amount of Ukrainian soldiers, including a lot of elite brigades. Not just like one or two, but a sizable amount of elite soldiers with modern equipment, including foreign provided Western equipment, moved in and started breaking through the Russian defenses. And the first day was largely consistent of breaking through these Russian defenses, while the second day was largely consistent of then moving past these and continuing to move now into the unobjected or uncontested areas of Kursk. Now, there are Russian soldiers here. There were like FSB border guards in the area, but there was not enough FSB border guards to deal with the amount of soldiers, to deal with the FPV attacks, to deal with the Ukrainian tanks, to deal with the towed and SPG artillery from the Ukrainian side. It was just not enough. And since there were no troops to really respond here, because they saw this buildup probably, or this is the likely scenario, I'm speculating here, as a defensive buildup, they had nothing to respond with, and so the border caved in. The defensive positions that they did have, the trenches and stuff that they built up in these frontline villages, the Ukrainians were able to take most of those on the first day, and then they've been moving past that ever since, capturing village after village, town after town, at quite a rapid pace. In fact, they have captured so much territory up to this point that I believe it was yesterday or the day before, the Ukrainians had already captured enough territory that they've captured more than the Russians have during the Volchansk offensive for the last 2 to 3 months. And of course, they've done it in a much shorter period of time with much less casualties. So because the Ukrainians at least had some troops in the Kharkiv area, they were not caught as off guard, while the Russians here seem to have been caught completely off guard. So they break through these, and I'm not going to get into I can show you like the layered maps for every trench line and every cool little defense is dug in. We don't need to do any of that, okay? None of that's necessary. As you can see, from like your eyeballs, okay? Let's just, I hate to be the common sense guy. The Ukrainians were here, now they're here, okay? They've made progress, and they've made rapid progress. And I think one of their largest captures so far was this town, tiny city right here, Sudza. I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing it terribly. But it's probably one of the largest locations they've captured so far. The Russians fought really hard not to lose it, but they did, with geolocatable footage being recorded at a Gazprom facility in the location by local soldiers from the 99th Mechanized Battalion. So let's listen to what they had to say. Wishing you health from the town of Sudza. These are the news. The town is under Ukrainian forces' control. The town is quiet and all the buildings are intact. The strategic Gazprom object is under control of the 99th Mechanized Battalion of the 61st Separate Rifle Brigade. Peaceful sky to everyone. Okay, so there's not a lot of videos like this. This is one of the few videos like this. This you can't really hear much fighting in the city anymore. This all but confirms that they control basically all of it. Now, there is also reports about like fighting in the area still down here, and exactly how much of this they control, and of them moving forward still like rapidly in this direction. What they control down in the contested zones, I cannot tell you the exact specifics of. And I honestly cannot be bothered to try to like discern what report is true and not true at this point. So I'm just going to say that this we do know for sure is captured. These areas are currently contested, are in the state of, are about to be captured, or are being contested in some other manner, and is blurry as to what they're, what status they have. But more of this picture is going to be filled in the time to come. But as of right now, we have been given no indication that the Ukrainians are slowing down. They've advanced about 20 to 25 kilometers into Russia itself at this point. And many people are talking about now outages in the Kursk region. So what one object of the offensive could be, and is being actively talked about, is there is a nuclear power plant in this area. I think about like another 25 to 30 kilometers from where the Ukrainian armed forces are at this point. And there are SPGs, these are valuable artillery pieces that the Ukrainians are keeping relatively close to the front line. And so some people are thinking, because they're seeing some pretty important substations being taken out currently by what the Russians are calling falling debris, as you can see from this right here. But what is almost certainly Ukrainian attacks, they are knocking out electrical support for much of the Kursk region. And I think the Ukrainians might very well be trying to force the Russians to turn off the nuclear power plant, cut out electrical support for the Kursk region, which will not only have a massive demoralizing impact. I mean, the electricity outages in Rostov for a few days had a terrible impact on the relationship between the community and the government, with people protesting on the streets, blocking traffic. If this happens for an extended period of time, especially if the Ukrainians actually dig in and can keep this knocked out for a while, that could have a massive demoralizing impact. But also, there is like infrastructure here to support the war, and that could be knocked out and damaged by the Ukrainians. There are locations here that are necessary for the unloading of trains that the Ukrainians could capture. There are, of course, the electrical substations being knocked out is going to affect those trying to supply troops in occupied Ukraine or anywhere down here. Like, I don't want to get into all the strategic benefits. Point is, they could be going for the nuclear plant to knock it out, to knock out the electricity. There is a possibility that they are possibly trying to take land so they can trade it later, but of them keeping this land is going to be difficult, and it's going to be dependent upon constant resupply. And one thing that worried me was about permission by the West to strike Russian forces that are attacking in this area. I was worried about whether or not the Ukrainians were going to get that permission, because so far they were denied it. But then the deputy Pentagon press secretary came out with a statement that seems to indicate to me that they're going to be okay with the Ukrainians using this Western gear over the border in this area. Listen to this. Sabrina Singh is the deputy Pentagon press secretary. Can you provide us an update on Ukraine's incursion into Kursk? Is that consistent with the United States sort of understanding of what Ukraine can and cannot do with U.S. weapons? Thanks for the question. So, yes, it is. It is consistent with our policy, and we have supported Ukraine from the very beginning to defend themselves against attacks that are coming across the border for the need for crossfires. So they are taking actions to protect themselves from attacks that are coming from a region that are within the U.S. policy of where they can operate. You know, our weapons, our systems, our capabilities. In terms of the actual operations that's ongoing in the Kursk region that you've referenced, I'd refer you to the Ukrainians to speak more to that. We are getting more information, but it's really for them to speak to their own operations. So is the policy then essentially wherever they see an attack emanating from or a grouping of troops, so could Moscow include as well if they saw some sort of preparation for them to then go into Moscow as that? Again, we don't support long-range attacks into Russia. These are more for crossfire. I'm not going to put a specific range on it. As you know, do they have limits? The Ukrainians are aware of the U.S. policy and what we are supportive of. I think you know from the very beginning, we are supportive of Ukraine and their successes on the battlefield. But as the dynamics have shifted on the battlefield, they've been actually able to push the Russians back further into Russian territory. But as they see attacks coming across the border, they have to be able to have the capabilities to respond. And so you're seeing some of these cross-counter fire border measures that they're being able to take that are near the border of Ukraine. We do not support long attacks into Russia. We said that from the very beginning. I'm not going to draw, a circular map here for where and where they can't strike. But we've been very clear with the Ukrainians. So, to me, right, as long as the Ukrainians can say that the Russians have done something from the Kursk Oblast as an attacking measure or as a preparatory measure for attack, which they've used the Kursk to supply the war, and there was those limited range raids into the Sumy Oblast that the Chechens did to raise the flag, even if it was just for TikTok, that a justification can be used for the use of Western weapons. And while I believe the Russians are finding remnants of Western weapons on strike sites, we haven't heard any confirmation from the United States if there is permission for them to use said weapons, but we are getting videos like this of them using missiles to strike Russian convoys that are being redeployed to support Kursk. And I'll let this video keep playing, but I mean, they took out like 15, 14 vehicles here. This was dozens and dozens of Russian casualties. I've seen the videos. I've seen the videos of the bodies. I cannot show that on stream, obviously, but I can confirm. You can see all the people running around here. I can confirm that this was a devastating strike on a Russian convoy. And as the Ukrainians have drones monitoring the sky, and many Russians have been redeploying, including Russian state TV, have been posting videos online to calm panic of troops redeploying, they can use that information to find the troops that are redeploying and try to do this to other convoys as well. So I don't know why Russian state TV keep filming this redeployment outside of just propaganda purposes. If these soldiers that they are filming are actually being redeployed, they are doing them the worst disservice you could possibly imagine by continuing to film and publish that footage. Now, we talked about two reasons why the Ukrainians could be doing this: to build up some territory on the border, to the damage to supporting of the war from Kursk and knocking out the electrical infrastructure. But another reason, and I think also a big reason that this offensive was launched, and if it wasn't for this reason, then it would be strategically misguided, because if they were not removing pressure from these points, then this would be a disaster for manpower reasons, is that the Ukrainians want to remove pressure from the Pokrovsk axis, from the Avdiivka axis, from the Chasiv Yar axis, from the Kupiansk axis. Basically, the Ukrainians need to remove pressure from out east. If you're out east and you're looking at the Pokrovsk axis, if you're looking at any of the areas where the Russians are making rapid progress right now, the situation is not good. We're talking about the Russians advancing and sometimes a kilometer a day. We're 5 to 6 kilometers over a week, getting closer and closer and closer to Pokrovsk, losing sometimes a village in every 1 to 2 days. This is a much quicker advance that the Russians were making before. And this has to do with a few problems. One still has to do with the ever-present problem of the Russians just having more artillery ammunition than the Ukrainians. While the worst of the artillery starvation crisis has been averted, those problems are still there, they're still present, and American and Western artillery production increases have not been plentiful enough to make that less of a problem, or not enough of a problem for them to stop them. There's also the problem of that while the mobilization bills for Ukraine have passed, a lot of those people still haven't actually been mobilized. And they either in the ones that have or in training centers. And the Ukrainians, the last thing they need to do right now is take all these new people who are just mobilized when they have a manpower crisis and then send them into battle for the hope of delaying the Russian advance maybe a few more weeks, and throwing away all these lives because they were not properly trained or equipped. And they have a problem with not getting enough equipment from the West when it comes to modern armor. Air defense systems is another shortage that they have, etc. Even though apparently a big problem for the Russians in the Kupiansk offensive is that the Ukrainians have proper air defense around that area, and they've lost a few helicopters, not only from air defense systems, they've lost jet-to-air defense systems, but also FPV drones that have rammed themselves into helicopters. I believe we have some footage of that. We might look at that later. But the Ukrainians have a manpower problem, and those troops that they need that are being trained are not going to be ready until maybe November. And so that gives August, September, and October of some very difficult fighting in months ahead for the Ukrainians. And so the Ukrainians, almost certainly, and I'm saying this almost certainly even though I can't read their minds, because if they didn't do this with this in mind, then this would be putting these troops at a horrible disadvantage for a goal that is still not particularly clear. The Ukrainians launching this offensive into Kursk might well make the Russians, or force the Russians, depending on how much progress is made and how much the Russians can actually tamper down the story, to redeploy troops that are currently engaged in offensive operations on the Pokrovsk axis, or the Chasiv Yar axis, or the Kupiansk axis, or anywhere the Russians are pushing really hard right now and the Ukrainians need to relieve pressure. And then once those troops are redeployed, maybe then the front line around Kursk will stabilize, but by that time, the Ukrainians will have had more time to mobilize troops. The Russians will now be fighting in areas where they're not extremely well dug in, and maybe then the front line here stabilizes, but by that point, it will have achieved the goal of at least relieving some pressure from these troops over here. And if they do that, then that could give the Ukrainians enough time to properly dig in around Pokrovsk to get more troops mobilized and defend these areas. And so the Russians don't want to remove pressure from Pokrovsk, mainly because they don't want to give the Ukrainians more time to dig in. They don't want to give the Ukrainians more time to resupply, because every day that passes, more Western aid does come in. They don't want to give the Ukrainians more time to get troops mobilized, to get troops prepared. But they also don't want to fight in winter conditions. The longer time goes on from this point forward, you're creeping closer and closer to winter. And everything that Russia wants to do is only going to get harder once it gets cold. And once it gets cold, that's going to benefit the defender. And while it's going to suck for both sides having to live in the cold, the guy who has to live in the cold and then run across a cold open field covered in ice is having an even worse time than the guy who's sitting in a dirty cold hole as well. So, but at least has to, sit there, can shoot at them and then go back in their warm trench. So at the moment, the Russians face a dilemma. Do they remove troops from the east in order to remove pressure, but then lose the opportunity that the offensive now provides, with the Ukrainians losing possibly like a kilometer of land a day, which is the most they've been losing in a long time? Or do they grind on with the possibility that the Ukrainians could make more and more and more progress in Kursk, to the point of knocking out electricity in the region, causing a ton of discontent, messing up the resupplies to Volchansk and the troops that are attacking in this area? And can I just say, with this offensive now clear, and with the Ukrainians now giving much more damage than they did in Belgorod and any of the previous raids, the Volchansk offensive boggles my mind more than ever. Okay? It boggles my mind more than ever. Because from the Kremlin, what they said when they did the offensive in the Volchansk was, this is meant to create a barrier. This is meant to create a barrier between us and the Ukraino-Nazis, and this barrier shall keep us safe because it will stop them from doing raids in the future. Now, you can just say that was PR, that was propaganda, but the problem is, if you say that this is gonna stop this, and then immediately are followed by the worst raid ever, if you can even still call this a raid, then I would say to even the Russian public that would be amounted to as a failure, which might explain why Putin again looks like this at the moment. But if you look at it from any angle, okay, they wanted to get within artillery range. I was talking to Jake Bro in his podcast today, that'll be released on Sunday, like about this, like he thought maybe it was to get within artillery range of Kharkiv. Maybe that was a possibility, but it failed there. Well, maybe it was just a goal to capture Vovchansk and Lipsky. Well, it failed there. In creating a barrier, it failed there. Well, maybe the intention, and this was the one thing which I think they did for sure succeed in, at least partially, was to take Ukrainian troops from the east where the Russians want to add pressure and make them redeploy here to defend in this area, so it'd be easier for them to gain land in Pokrovsk, which to at least partially, and this is undeniable, they succeeded, because I was interviewing troops who were fighting on Lipsy, and we're going to release that mortar footage within the month that were fighting, that were within like a month before that they were out east fighting. So there was some redeployment, but now with Ukrainian troops launching a big offensive here, like now the Russians will be the ones having to redeploy. Now it's the Ukrainians choosing the tempo. It's the Ukrainians choosing where the battle is happening. And because they're choosing where the battle is happening, we're getting video after video after video, not only of like, you know, of the Ukrainians fighting in Kursk, which is to think about all the German equipment and all the Western equipment fighting in Kursk. Now in 2023, 80 years after the Battle of Kursk is wild to think of. But we're getting tons of videos of Russian POWs getting walked off. And I'm not going to show all of them because there's a lot of videos of Russian POWs getting walked off. But here's just one video of about 40 of them lined up that the Ukrainians claimed were captured by 4 Ukrainian special operators. Now, I don't know if that's true. That's the Ukrainian claim. And, you know, people will always make their heroes look even more heroic. But those are a lot of Russian POWs, and this is only one video. I've seen another one of like another 30. I saw another video of another 20. And so what you've probably gotten from the videos that I've seen of these guys, they seem to be a little younger, probably a lot of young conscriptoviches whose mothers are probably going to be a lot more hesitant about the fact that their son got captured and is now not coming home, because they didn't even think they were going to be in the war in Ukraine, because their contract says, hey, don't worry about it. You're not going to actually be fighting in the war. And they were telling their moms they're not actually going to be fighting in the war. And now all of a sudden, they've gotten captured by Ukrainian forces on Russian territory, in the territory of Kursk, when it was supposed to be a 3-day operation. Again, I don't want to talk too much about the PR implications, but this has an effect on the Russian psyche. This has an effect on an aura of invincibility, and it has to be pointed out. It has to be pointed out. But of course, I do need to say that one big reason that I am very nervous about this operation is any operation like this where you're going to be taking your equipment out of defensive shrubbery and out of your enshrouded positions, covered in sandbags, in trenches, and you know where the area is, and you're entering enemy territory, territory where the locals might be even less friendly than the worst areas of Ukraine. You're in a different scenario, and there's going to be equipment losses. There's going to be losses of, if you put artillery, there's going to be losses of artillery. You put trucks over the border, there's going to be losses of trucks. You put like tanks or any armored vehicles like that over the border, there's going to be losses of all these things. Now, right here is an American M777 howitzer. I filmed with a crew using one of these things during the tail end of the counteroffensive down south. Taken out by a Russian drone attack. Now, this is just one video. There's also a lot of Ukrainian MRAPs that were taken out, a lot of Ukrainian armored vehicles that were taken out during this offensive, because the Ukrainian had to break through defensive structures. And so here comes the dilemma that a lot of people are facing. On one hand, the Ukrainians face a manpower shortage that is only going to see relief, real relief, coming into the late part of this year, November, December, when all the people who are being trained right now, who were recruited in the last wave, are going to be ready for serious types of combat and not just some like trench digging, right? Or, and to put it bluntly, meat wave attacks, which is not something you want to do when you're facing a much more populous opponent in a war that many would describe as attritionary. So if you're taking this equipment and you're dedicating it to new offensives, while the Russians are gaining progress on Pokrovsk and the Russians are gaining progress, they've crossed the dam. We're hearing they crossed the reservoir in Chasiv Yar, and they're now pushing, and there was a counterattack to push them out, but then the Russians pushed them back, and now they're fighting on the west side of Chasiv Yar, which is not good. There's fighting there. There's a manpower shortage. There's a manpower shortage around, the Pokrovsk area. There's a manpower shortage basically everywhere that the Russians are adding pressure out east, somewhere worse than others, some places worse than others, but there's a manpower shortage. And so now you're taking all these troops, and you're taking all this ammunition, and you're taking all of sometimes the best equipment, and you're not just taking any troops, you're taking some of the most elite troops in the entire Ukrainian forces, and you're dedicating them to this offensive into Kursk. And yes, this raid is more effective than the last ones. Yes, they've broken through. Yes, they're taking more territory than the Russians have in the last 2 months when you talk about like the Volchansk offensives or anything like that. Yes, it's impressive. Yes, it's kind of funny. Yes to all these things. But are these resources being used wisely? Is more damage being done to Russia through this Kursk offensive and through the weakened negotiating position that could come from it if they can actually manage to hold on to the territory, which will come with costs in and of itself, than if they were to let these troops rest as they're getting in these new recruits and dedicate them and stream them to the east slowly, so these more elite troops could be concentrating on defending the territory Ukraine has now, instead of trying to grab chunks out of Kursk, do damage to the infrastructure of Kursk, or try to divert the Russians in a roll of the dice gamble offensive. And so I'm not saying that to be a doomer. I'm not saying that to rain on everybody's parade and pour ice water on you guys. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just trying to be realistic with you guys that what the Ukrainians just did is basically said, you know what? The best defense is a good offense. Rolled the dice, offensive. And the Russians basically ignored it, thinking, pfft. And again, we don't know everything behind it, but just trying to paint the picture here. In order going, no way they do that. And by the time they realized that they actually would do that, it was already too late, and the Russians are facing the security crisis that is again causing Putin to look like this. Which, while great and makes us all smile, we still do not know if the Ukrainians are going to achieve their max objectives. If they're going to actually be able to make the Russians, for example, turn off that nuclear power plant. If they're going to be able to capture the train stations that the Russians use in the area to support the war effort. But they are getting closer to doing it. Ukrainians are making rapid progress. But as the Ukrainians are making rapid progress, the Russians are using every resource they can to divert any troops they can into the area to try to push back against the Russians. Back against the Ukrainians. Russian forces are redeploying units and reserves to the area, pulling troops from multiple eastern directions, including those recently recovering from previous assaults. The 488th Motor Rifle Regiment's motor battery, previously on the Kupiansk front, is already in the Kursk region. So, if the goal of this offensive was to make Russian troops redeploy from the east, partially, we don't know how much success it has been, because the Russians could say, okay, remove some pressure off Kupiansk, get those guys to defend Kursk, but keep the pressure on Pokrovsk. They could still do that. And Pokrovsk is where they're facing the most trouble. There in Chasiv Yar, they're facing a lot of trouble right now. But they are, to at least some degree, redeploying troops in order to try to fight back against these rapid Ukrainian gains. There's also words that the Russian Aerospace Forces Motor Rifle Regiment is also taking in parts into defense of the Russian lines in the Kursk Oblast. And so they are really grabbing everyone they can. Everyone and anyone they can in the region that can hold a rifle, they have defending the area, including people whose skills would be much better utilized in, say, the aerospace forces and not holding a rifle, digging a hole in a trench in the middle of Kursk. This is footage, by the way, of that devastating strike that we talked about earlier. I can't really show much of this because of, not safe for work reasons, because this is like a lot of death and destruction, but just to show that that is real. I also want to say that one rumor that is going around, but is not 100% confirmed, but is a rumor, and as word of mouth goes, I do want to talk about it for at least the historical word of mouth record, that Kadyrov's forces, the leader of the pro-Russian Kadyrov Chechens, they reportedly ran away when Ukrainian forces crossed the border, tucked their tail between their legs and ran away once the Ukrainians started to attack. Now, we don't know if for sure this is true. It is true that they were supposed to at least be in the area, and people are asking where they are, but how much they actually, got, and like ran away, we don't know how true that is. But it isn't just pro-Ukraine people saying it, or analysts saying it, or journalists saying it. It's also Russian soldiers in some instances that are saying it. And there was a Russian conscript that was grabbed by one of the Chechen leader's guys, and then put on camera and forced to apologize after he said that the Chechens fled when the Ukrainians attacked. Hello, I wanted to explain the situation with Kursk and Akhmat. Akhmat is the Chechen leader's forces. I said Akhmat is the only unit close to conscripts. There are no contract soldiers there. And conscripts complain they're alone and only helped by Akhmat. They're taking losses. Akhmat is helping them. I apologize for a lack of understanding. My words were misunderstood. Oof. Rough day for that guy. Rough day for that guy. Also, I said about that a helicopter being taken out by FPV drones. Here is that video. So you guys do not know I was lying. And by the way, this is one of multiple videos. I think this is the second video, and as I was going live, a third video of the Ukrainian forces doing this was posted online. Now, how much this is something that can be repeated across multiple platforms, if like the Ukrainian armed forces can reliably knock out helicopters with FPV drones, I do not know that. I can tell you this takes immense skill from an FPV pilot. I've embedded with FPV teams. I filmed their work. It is not that easy to hit a target, let alone hit a moving target that's going at high speeds, especially one that knows that you're trying to get them and is trying to avoid you. Now, we don't know if the helicopter knew of their presence, but we certainly knew it was a helicopter traveling at high speeds. So the fact that they're able to do this does show immense skill on behalf of the drone pilot, and we have seen multiple instances of this, suggesting that it might not just be one drone pilot, but multiple drone pilots who have figured out how to do this. Combine this with the fact that the Ukrainians do have air defense in the area, and the reason we know this is because we keep getting replays from the Russians of the effective Ukrainian air defense in the area. I do also just want to take one teensy moment, to just look at this post from David Sachs from earlier this year. So the Institute for the Study of War, which doesn't always get it right, I had a lot more respect for it at the start of the war, but I haven't completely lost respect for it either. Ukraine is very likely to stabilize the fronts in the coming months and may be able to launch limited counteroffensive operations in late 2024, early 2025. Now, late 2024, we're in August right now, so we're not even in the late 2024. We're just arriving in late 2024. And now we have not a counteroffensive, because there was no offensive for Russia to take Kursk, just an offensive into the Kursk Oblast. David Sachs said, lol, bookmark this. I did bookmark this. That is why I have this. And David Sachs was once again wrong, because David Sachs knows nothing about the war in Ukraine, and you guys need to stop trusting armchair commentators who have never been to Ukraine, don't know any Ukrainians, haven't spent any time studying Ukraine, haven't put any effort into learning about the war, but just want to grab catchy headlines and slogans and throw them around to beat the drum on their populist position that'll get them tons of updates with no media scrutiny, no deeper scrutiny to what they're saying, or no deeper scrutiny to what they're thinking. Anyway, one more time of David Sachs being wrong, but I do want to say that the Ukrainians have not stabilized the Pokrovsk axis, and the success of this operation will probably largely be dependent upon whether or not they can stabilize that axis and they can get out of this without have taking massive losses or dedications of troops into the Kursk region when they have this manpower crisis. Can they force the Russians to divert troops? Can they come out of this with territory in Kursk that they could use as leverage in negotiations? And can they destabilized the Russian presence in Kursk, making it an oblast that is much more difficult, having a much more difficult time in supporting the invasion of Ukraine. This we do not know, but we will see, because the Ukrainians are not slowing down, and where exactly they're going to stop, no one knows yet. Hinkle imploded when he heard. Oh, I bet he did. I bet he's fucking pissed. He's probably like screaming at the top of his lungs, "This is the Third Reich, Fourth Reich, Fourth Reich." Man, this is still surreal. It's hard to believe that I'm witnessing this though. And can I just say, I contact a lot of the more doomery guys. I know a lot of doomers. Everybody I know in Ukraine is to some degree like pretty energetic about this. Even the ones that are like, look, I still do not know if this is the right decision. We'll have to see how much success our forces get to understand if it was or was not. But they're still pretty energetic about this. This has really given a lot of people a real boost. A real boost. Who is David Sachs? Keep that aura right there. That aura you just said, where is David Sachs? Keep it, run with it. Never let it go. Take it home. Take it home. Go home with it. Go home with it. Okay. Any questions about this, boys, before we move on to the next topic? Because we still have more on this. We're not completely done. I want to talk about the Russian response to this, because the Russians are not having a great time, as you can imagine. Okay. Is Ukraine going around Russia's defenses by going through Russia? Well, they kind of broke through them, honestly. They broke through them. It's just this was an area not ready for these many troops, and the defenses that were there were understaffed for the amount of men that were attacking. They did take out some MRAPs. If you go back to like the first day, you can see like in a lot of these locations, like here, and like you could see like a bunch of like destroyed Ukrainian armor in the first days. But after that, after they got through these defenses, it was like game over, like territorially. The Ukrainians just broke through, and now they're spreading out because there just was not enough troops to hold them back. And I mean, the Ukrainians that were breaking through here were not like nobodies. They were fully equipped. They had modern equipment. They were elites, and they were able to break through. I mean, a lot of them were elite. And when I say elite, I mean like experienced troops that have been fighting over the whole country. Troops that could be desperately used right now on the Pokrovsk front, but the Ukrainians have decided to do this instead. Whether or not that ends up being the smart decision, the historians will have to find out. That's the historians will figure that out. But also, the Russians did abandon some new T-80s, so that means that there's a chance that we're going to be getting some T-80s in the near future back in Ukrainian service. And I just filmed, by the way, T-80s that were captured by the Russians during the Kharkiv captured by the Ukrainians from the Russians during the Kharkiv counteroffensive. I just released that article with Offbeat Research if you guys wanted to take a closer look at a T-80. And I got to shout out Offbeat Research, who helps me a ton with my stuff on the ground in Ukraine with my credentials, which is the stuff I hate the most. It's the goddamn paperwork. Anyway, yeah, no, this offensive is crazy. This offensive is crazy, 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 crazy. And it's kind of hard to cover because we're kind of an unprecedented territory, because like with everything else, I could say, so this is the next major strategic location. Like I'm just learning about strategic locations as they fall. For example, the Ukrainians should be now out to the outskirts of Konevo, which is like the next big location they were going to capture after Sutska, which they've already captured. And rumor has it that they've already like dug in some areas over here, and that they've already captured this village here, but this village is like on the edge. We don't know if this village is captured. That's the rumors though. But yeah, no, this is probably the next big fight for the Russians. They don't want to lose this. They don't want to lose it bad. I believe, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of learning about a lot of these locations as we go, because like I could tell you quite a bit about the need to keep Pokrovsk, and how Pokrovsk over here is needed to support, you know, Toretsk is needed to support Konstantinivka, is needed to support, which the Russians just blew up a grocery store in Konstantinivka. Beautiful location, beautiful city, beautiful people there. Horrible, horrible, horrible attack on the civilian population. Like I could tell you all the strategic needs for that, but like this wasn't supposed to be in the algorithm. So I'm kind of learning as they go, but I believe the Koronevo is a location where they have a train station that is used to unload equipment, unload trains and reload trains. So it's needed for example, transporting troops and supplies for the war and, you know, just goods down south. And the loss of it is going to be a loss for the Russians, if I remember correctly. If it's not this location, it's a location very close to it. They had 10 villages late morning Central Time. Honestly, by the next time we stream, because our next scheduled stream is going to be on Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific, 1 a.m. Kiev time. By that time, there will probably be much more land taken. I don't know if Kornevo will be captured by then. If the Ukrainians are lucky, they will have captured it. I don't know if the Ukrainians will have pushed the Russians out of this area. We don't know if the Ukrainians plan on pushing like into here, because I mean, if you look at it from this area now is very unsecure from a Russian perspective, because it could be attacked from the east, from the south, from the west, with only support coming from the north, and it risks getting cut off if Kornevo falls and they push through anymore. So we don't know exactly where the Ukrainians are going. They probably have a bunch of troops kind of like beelining for major objectives, with this being, I think, one of the first objectives. I guess Kornevo being one of the second objectives. Where they go from there, I don't know, but the nuclear power plant is our best guess, because taking that out would severely hurt the Kursk region. Dylan, do you have a link to this map website you're using? Yes, so I recommend this website more than Deep State, honestly.
Coffee or tea for ya, boss?
Oh, yes, but this is map.Ukraine daily updates. I like these guys for a few reasons, but Andrew Pateria, who we had on the show recently, this is his website. And you guys can go and you can see his listing of the destruction of the different destroyed vehicles, and he puts them in the spreadsheets, and you can see every video as he goes through the open source. He has a team behind him. This app is pretty accurate, and it updates faster, in my experience, than Deep State. So if you want a faster map that I trust pretty hard, this is the one. The Textera leaks included spied-on conversations with Zelensky where he was considering taking Russian territory to trade in peace talks. This is something that we've talked about before, and the reason, I don't know if you know about it because I said it, but I kept talking about it since it happened, and I kept talking about it, and I kept talking about it, and I was like, God, are they actually going to do that? Because that had an impact on me. The Jack Textera leaks had a real impact on me, and the only impact I saw on it on the conservative right was like Tucker Carlson misquoting it to give fake death numbers on the Ukrainian forces, reversing the Ukrainian and Russian death numbers to make it look worse for Ukraine. And just like people laughing about Thug Shaker Central. But like a lot of the deliberations within the Ukrainian administration, putting aside any of the strategic info, which most of it was stuff we already knew, I think we learned a little bit more about the specific number of like Western operators in the country, which I think there was like 12 American. Who knows how many are defending like embassy staff or whatever, was the deliberations amongst the administration. And one thing that the Ukrainians were talking about and was talked about in the Jack Textera leaks, and for those of you who don't remember, Jack Textera was a National Guardsman about a year ago who was trying to impress his buddies on Discord, on this Thug Shaker Central Discord channel. And so he wanted to post classified information. And at first he would single-handedly type up every single message that he would get classified, but then when nobody was impressed and he got frustrated, he started just taking pictures. Started taking a picture here, taking a picture there, taking a picture there, and just posting that until eventually that got shared around. The government found out and clamped down on him, and now he's in a lot of trouble. And it was all to impress people who could not care at all, about the stuff he was posting. It was very sad. He ruined his life for nothing. But we found out from those leaks that the Zelensky administration was considering whether they should try to attack Russia, take Russian territory, and then tell the Russians, we'll only give you this territory back if you give us our territory back in negotiations that come down the line. Now, I was considering that at the time, and I just didn't know if the West would permit such a thing, if the West would allow its weapons to be used in such an operation. But now that we're hearing that HIMARS are being used in this operation, and the deputy press secretary gave a very subtle hint that it could be allowed in said operations, I guess maybe the situation has changed. It does make me think, though, What if in 2023, instead of the offensive being down south in Zaporizhia, it was in Kursk? But then again, back then they maybe would have had more troops to redeploy. More men to draw on, who knows? Situation could be different for a bunch of reasons. It's very hard to do alternative history.